Pucks with Haggs is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe it's the 150th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We have a very esteemed and honored guest for this 150th episode, Boston.com's Conor Ryan. Conor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody else out there, thank you for listening. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. You get all of my Bruins and NHL writing sent straight directly to your inbox. And then I also file columns 3 times a week. That's thrice weekly for the Boston Sports Journal at bostonsportsjournal.com. Get yourself a membership to that. Some great writing. Greg Bedard, Mike Giardi, a cast of thousands covering all of the Boston sports teams. Great coverage there, so go check it out. Before we get into this episode, we're going to talk about the big wins in the road over Vancouver and Calgary and some of the things that we've seen over the last week or so with this Boston Bruins team. I want to thank our sponsors real quick. First, there's Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Also, when you're looking for tickets, go to our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Conor, what time is it?
Game time.
Game time. That's right. Game time. All right. Big win, 4-3 overtime win over Calgary on Tuesday night. They came back from a 3-1 deficit and a 2-0 deficit. A lot of really good things to like about this one, Conor. But I'm going to have guests pick here to decide what stood out to you the most. What was your favorite thing? What did you like the most that you saw in that come from behind win when it was all done? What were you left with as the remaining thought, the most dominant thought when you watched that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look just within that one game, the way they responded in that third period, because if you look at the way that, the second period, they pushed a little bit after a really low event, nothing first 20 minutes of that game, right? Where
yes.
Everyone's like, oh, that first 20 minutes, everyone watched that and they're probably like, oh, it's going to be a long evening in terms of what are we going to be writing about?
Period.
Yeah.
They're basically
exactly.
chasing the game for the entire first 20 minutes.
And so I think especially when you look at what has kind of plagued this team this whole year is there's been taking one step forward and 2 steps back, right? You look at the Vancouver win, really, really dominant in that game after 2 bad losses. And you're like, all right, are they taking a step forward? And then you have that first period against Calgary. You're like, oh, I guess not. And then you look at that second period, right, where they finally get on the board with the Lindholm goal. And you're like, all right, 2-1 game, you kind of like where they are. And then bad gaps, bad kind of defensive coverage there. And it's a goal that can't happen with under 2 minutes to go in the second period. You're like, all right back where they started. Like, we know what happens next. And we know what's happened with this team, especially in third periods where a break doesn't go their way. And then all of a sudden, the other team scores another 2-3 goals in the third period. Like, it felt like that's what we were setting ourselves up for in terms of the way that game was going. So full credit to the Bruins, though. They really controlled most of that third period. And again, it wasn't like they were reinventing the wheel or doing anything else. They were just, beating Calgary to loose pucks. They were aggressive on the forecheck, making things happen, crashing the net. It's not anything that's, out of the ordinary, not anything that's revolutionary in terms of what we've seen or what this team especially needs to do to string together, strong stretches of play. So, I mean, listen, it's encouraging. They really controlled the last 35-ish minutes of that game, right, in terms of the way that game went. But I still think within the viewpoint of one game, it's a step in the right direction. But again, let's see them start building off of these things. If you didn't have these two, it's the problem with this team where it feels like they have been generally playing better since Sacco took over. But man, that stretch against Seattle and Winnipeg still like, let's see this over a little bit longer, right? I'm not going to give this team the benefit of the doubt when it's been a trend all year. Like, good result, but look at that comeback win on the road against St. Louis. I think we all felt that game was like, all right, that's the kind of win you need. Let's get rolling here. So let's see how they go on Thursday against a very, very dynamic, dangerous Oilers team.
Yeah, no, that Look, they evened up on the road right now. They're 2-2. The horrible first two games. They've won the last couple games, encouraging, but they're at basically 500 road trip right now. If they really want to end this road trip successfully, they've got to finish it out strong against Edmonton, and they need to get the result there. And that's really where they're going to show kind of where they're at. I agree with you there. And I also think, to a degree, I think you kind of have to make peace with the fact that I think we're going to see from this Bruins team some bad losses against good teams. We're just going to see it. There are going to be some nights where a good team catches them, where they don't have their legs, where it's, something's going on, where they don't have it in the tank to really withstand it. Or, frankly, the other team's skill and their best players just dictate what's going on. And the Bruins seem to not have enough to withstand that and to endure that without giving up a bunch of goals. And I think we're going to see some games like against Winnipeg, like against Dallas earlier this year, like against Carolina earlier this year. And the goal differential is probably not going to be pretty at the end of the year, even if the record is decent, because some of these good teams are just going to spank them. And it seems like at times in the third period, they don't have whatever they need, like that makeup to withstand it, to weather the storm. At times they crack. And I think we've seen it happen a few times in the third period of games where they just let it get away from them. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to change as sort of a one-game outlier every once in a while against a good team. I think that's just part of the cake. It's baked in the cake of what this team is going to be this year. And unfortunately, that part of it tells me that they're not going to be like a very long playoff run kind of team, because they all play good teams every team in the playoffs is a good team. And, if they don't have the wherewithal to be able to withstand that kind of stuff, and they crack at certain times against those kind of teams, and sometimes their centers get outplayed by centers on the other teams, like that Winnipeg game, they just got dominated by the Winnipeg centers in that game. Like when all that stuff is happening, I think it basically points to some flaws with this team that I think are going to be fatal when they get in the postseason. But they're good enough to make the playoffs. So I think I kind of view them in that sort of prism right now. And maybe that'll change based on what they do at the trade deadline. If they can get in a good enough offensive player, a winger, or even if they went out and decided to get another center. I don't know what they're going to do. But most likely you would think they're going to get a scorer and a winger. And maybe that changes a little bit of how you view this team, but I'm not sure it's going to fundamentally change what this team is this year and their DNA and what they have. But that all being said, I thought there were a number of things that I really liked about last night's game. Certainly the third period was one of them. They outshot the Flames 15-5. They scored a couple goals. They were much stronger in the third period against Calgary. And frankly, like that Lomberg goal, when it went up, they went up 3-1 towards the end of the second period. When we saw the Winnipeg game and we saw the Seattle game, that's kind of where things fell apart and they kind of caved in and cracked. And the fact that they didn't do that this time and that they instead came out and played a very strong final 20 minutes, it did show something. And they're going to have to do that a lot more before I'm going to believe that they're always that, especially against good teams. Like they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt doing it once. They're going to have to do it multiple times before you really start to believe in that. But I thought that was an excellent, really good thing. Mark McLaughlin comes up with a goal, hard-nosed goal, going to the net. Now he's scored a couple of goals since he came back up, and he seems to be showing some of that bottom six spark that they wanted to get out of him. That, frankly, I think we can say it at this point, Connor. Jim Montgomery did not believe in Mark McLaughlin. I think it's pretty obvious. He did not get really a sniff when Jim Montgomery was the coach here, and as soon as Montgomery is gone and Joe Sacco comes in, McLaughlin is up and he's playing a regular role. And I think we see a much different view of that player. Maybe that gives us some of the inner workings view of what Montgomery was like a little bit behind the scenes, as far as like making determinations on players, making judgment on players, not changing his mind on players, like all that stuff. And maybe this is a little bit of what was going on in the background over the last couple of years, and certainly this year when it seemed like something was really wrong with that team. But McLaughlin comes up and does a really good job and ties the game up. A huge play. And it wasn't just the getting to the slot and getting that pass from Marchand, which was, by the way, a huge play from Elias Lindholm, too, to set that whole thing up. But then he goes to the net and he gets rewarded by sticking with it and doing exactly what he was supposed to do there and playing that sort of tenacious fourth line, third line role. So Mark McLaughlin, excellent. Elias Lindholm, third multi-point game of the season, 7 shots on net, scores the goal where he gets a little bit of a good bounce because it looked like it hit his stick hit the defender's stick and the puck kind of fooled the goalie. But he also makes a great play on that pass to Marchand, takes a hit to make that cross-ice pass and sees him entering the zone with speed. And that creates the whole play where Marchand turns around Rasmus Anderson and then feeds McLaughlin in the slot. Like that was, I think, even though he's had a 3-point game or he's had a couple 3-point games this year, Lindholm, I thought that was his best game as a Bruin, like by far. And maybe that's a turning point for him. Maybe maybe that will allow him to get a foothold where he can start playing better on a consistent basis. So that was something to like. Joe Sacco calling a timeout when they went down 2-0 in the second period, and they gave up 2 goals in 27 seconds. And they were all the bad Bruin stuff was happening right in that moment. Like you mentioned the Lomberg goal and the gaps and all that. Like I actually didn't hate that goal. Like it was bad as far as the situation, the time, but like Lomberg, you could tell was fresh off the bench and was flying. Like he was just tearing it down the ice, and you could tell like it was trouble immediately because he had the speed that he had. And they basically got a good bounce where the puck bounced right on Lomberg's stick at the side of the net. I felt like that was more Calgary getting a bounce there than that, like a huge breakdown by the Bruins based on the circumstance. The first 2 goals they gave up, massive breakdowns. Like they were leaving the slot alone, wide open twice. And that wasn't even the only 2 times. There were like 3 or 4 times in that first period and the first few minutes of the second where they left the slot completely wide open and Calgary was getting these great shots and they either missed the net or Swayman made the save. And then they finally scored on a couple. And Sacco takes a timeout at that point when they're down 2-0 and they gave up 2 goals in 27 seconds. And his message was calm and it was simple. And it was just, guys, start playing defense, start covering the slot, start doing the little things and the simple things, and everything else will be okay. Wasn't panicked, wasn't like a crazy, like fired up, like chewing guys out, swearing at guys message. And I think that helped the Bruins. That helped them kind of keep the poise, keep the calm, that they were still in it and they could come back. And I think that was an important thing that he did as the coach to help influence what was going on in that game. So I really liked that too. You know, there was a Swayman, I thought, in the second half of that game, made some great saves and kept them in it when another goal really was gonna hurt them badly. So, like, as much as I like the Vancouver game because they just played a game where they dominated Vancouver, played well beginning to end, I think you can take more out of this Calgary game from individual things that we saw players doing that said, wait a minute, maybe there's some things here if they continue to trend this way. And some people sort of like got a little bit more confidence here in that game where maybe that's going to push them forward and allow them to be bigger contributors or have the confidence to seize hold more of what's going on with this team and change sort of the dynamic of what we're seeing here. So I think much more than like the St. Louis win, I know a lot of people got excited about. I know Razor called that comeback win on Nesson. Like everybody was like, "Oh, this is it." Yeah, I saw that and I was like, "Yeah." I mean, it was a win against a non-playoff team. Like whatever, it was fine. But I could just see so many flaws with that team at that point that I was like, "This is not a turnaround. This is like a one-game blip where they're going to go right back to it," and they did. Last night felt more to me like it could be like a turning point thing that could push them into something bigger and better if they can really seize hold of that momentum and some of the things that they did moving forward.
Yeah, and you know, as you said earlier on, Joe, like, is this team built to like go on a deep playoff run right now? Probably not. But let's say things fall their way, right? Like, if you're going to win a round or two, like, you have to deal with a lot of adversity. There's not going to be a lot of 5-1 wins like you have in Vancouver. The other team does not show up the first 55 minutes of that game, whatever it was in Vancouver. If you're going, and especially when you look at this team and the personnel, like, you're gonna have to win some ugly games, whether it's you're clawing back. As you said, like after that timeout, I think they got back to the way they need to play, which isn't usually the most riveting brand of hockey, but it's simple, right? It's taking care of the front of the net. It's crashing the net, having greasy goals. As you said, like, I think McLaughlin's a guy that has kind of got his stock back up now that Montgomery's not here, where, again, he's not doing anything flashy, but if he's a fourth line guy and he's crashing the net and getting these greasy goals and cashing in on what these scoring chances need to be for this team, especially, like, I think we found out pretty early on that the quality over quantity kind of offensive approach under Montgomery just wasn't going to work with this team. Like,
No.
which is why it was kind of surprising they never kind of adjusted that, of like the square peg and the round hole. It's like, we don't have the finishers. You can have that approach if you've got, the Florida Panthers, where you got Reinhart, who can snap a puck from anywhere or something like that. This team doesn't have guys like that, or even the 22-23 team had you had Taylor Hall on the friggin' third line. Like, you had a lot of guys that could do that approach. Not with this team. So, yeah, I think when you look at what has been an issue this year for this team has been dealing with adversity, letting games slip away from you. Like, there's been quite a few of these games that end up being super lopsided, where for stretches of them, they really aren't. Like, even, the Winnipeg game, that one got away from them in the third period with stuff wasn't going their way. McAvoy takes bad penalties. The game just completely bottoms out on them. You look at that game in Dallas, right? They gave up 2 goals pretty early on. Coyle scores late in that one. So they go into the first intermission, and it's 2-1. You're like, wasn't a great period, but they're still in it. Dallas is a good team. Like, let's see what they got. And then bottoms out. Like, there's been quite a few of these games where they've been competitive, or they've been, hanging on the ropes, and then they slip and then face plant off the mat, or they just let the other team throw a haymaker at them and they're not ready for it. And I think this is, again, Calgary's not a world beater or anything, but this is a game that very well could have slipped away from them where things weren't going their way, and they stuck with it. And it's not like they changed their approach or anything. It's just they got back to how they need to play. And if you're the Bruins, and it's something I think we talked about when they were winning 4 in a row at home, and granted that was a very light schedule, but the way they played of locking down the net front, making simple, smart plays, not giving up odd man rushes, like, regardless of who you play, like, listen, the good teams, the one slip up you make usually means it's going to go in the back of your net. Like, you make one slip up against Draisaitl and McDavid, you're going to be in trouble. But if you play that way for as close to 60 minutes as you can, at the very least, you're going to be in some of these games. And I think if you're the Bruins and you're looking at the template of how they can try to put something together here, you kind of have to be like, I kind of compare them to like the 21 Islanders, where, like, man, that team was boring. But they were tight in their own end. They were not giving up a lot of chances. They win a lot of 2-1 games. And if you have some bounces go your way, you can be kind of a tough out. It's not the flashiest thing, but I think if you're the Bruins right now and you're trying to map out the best case scenario, it's like, all right, if we play that way, we don't give up anything, and we're a tough out, we kind of run the numbers and see if you can, get a few bounces go your way and hang in some of these games. And I think for them to come back in that game against Calgary and show that adversity was very, very encouraging, just within the span of just how this year has gone. That's the result you want to see when so many of these games have either been beating up bad teams or, just getting blown out and not being able to let one bad bounce completely derail your approach out there on the ice.
Yeah, and I think if you play that style, which I think you're absolutely right, they're much better suited to that style. The way Sacco has them playing right now, focused on playing the D-zone defensive structure and working from the net on out. You still have some guys that can make plays, that will make those bounces or make plays happen, that can win you those tight games. You still have Pastrnak, you still have McAvoy, you still have Marchand. They could probably use at least one more player that could step up and consistently be that guy. Sometimes Zacha can be that guy, but I think they could stand a trade for one more player that could, make a play out of nothing, that will help them be a little more dangerous offensively and maybe even take another half step up as far as who they are and what we can expect from them. But like you saw last night, Pastrnak just makes a play in overtime. He's gassed. He wants to come off the ice. But McAvoy wants to come off the ice too, so he basically drops a pass to him and then takes off to the bench to change and leaves Pasta out there, and Pasta makes a play and goes off both posts and rattles it in. Great shot. That's just a superstar goal in overtime. Great thing to see from him, and I think he's been better. He obviously was not good in Winnipeg, and he continues to have times where he's like, bad judgment, bad decisions, bad games, bad penalties in the offensive zone, but at least he's like responding to that. And like, he knows when he has a game like that, and he's responding with a much better game, kind of a star game. And the last couple games have been extremely good as far as that goes. But one guy we've talked about a little bit that had a really good game last night, Elias Lindholm. What did you see something last night that made you think, okay, maybe we're going to see a little bit more from him? where are you at with him just as far as what you've seen this season, and what expectations could be from him? I continue to wonder if he's just a guy that takes a long time to get comfortable in a situation, and if he's one of those guys that, because chemistry-wise, it just seems like he can't possibly be what we've seen offensively from him, where it looks like at times he's not expecting passes, he's not ready to shoot when guys get him pucks. Like, there's been a lot of things that seem like they're chemistry things to me, where he's just not comfortable with the guys that he's playing with, but he's starting to get there. And I certainly, when he has the puck and he's setting other guys up, I think we've seen him make some pretty good plays at times. But it's more his ability to finish and his ability to, take pucks and to finish them. And even that, I think we've started to see him start to expect Marchand to set him up in certain situations, and he's a little more ready for it now. I think we're starting to see what might be a little more of like the actual player we're going to get. Yeah,
I think he's definitely starting to settle in. I think he's starting to play his game a little bit more. I think he's been engaged like physically, like he's been laying out quite a few hits. I think even the game in Seattle, he only played 7 minutes because he left early, but I think he had like 6 hits and like 7-55 or something like that. And I think that's something you notice, especially in Vancouver, where, as you said, was really slow out of the gate there, and they were kind of putting him in a weird spot where he was like the third line center. He was a second line wing, so obviously they got Miller and Pettersson down the middle there, so he is kind of falling down the pecking order there. But you saw, especially in the playoffs, where he ramped up his play, was pretty physical as like a forechecking kind of guy with that group there in the playoffs as well. So yeah, maybe it's something where it takes a while for him to get rolling. He's kind of a puzzling player, right? Because I do like the details. I do like that he's getting engaged like physically, and I think he's been doing a lot of the right things. It's just when you're getting paid that much money, the details are great, but you can't be a really good third line center if you're getting that kind of money. You need to produce, right? That is the puzzling kind of thing with him, or the way you kind of assess how he's been doing. But it has been better so far. I mean, as you said, maybe it is something where it just takes time for him to get comfortable, get settled. Because as you said, like the first couple like weeks, first month plus, where especially early on when it's like, all right, well, if David Pastrnak can get like Eric Holla being an almost 50-point guy, Lindholm can be like 65 points, right? Like, I think everyone was like, all right. I think everyone set very reasonable expectations before the year of like, he's not going to be the 44-goal, 82-point guy he was that one year with Calgary where he was just on an insane line. But staple him next to Pastrnak. We see what Pastrnak does with Holla, with Zacha, all these guys. All right, he can be a 60-point guy, play a good two-way game, and I think that's what everyone was expecting. And then the fact there was just no chemistry, missing passes, like just felt like they were so disjointed. You're like, all right, well, this isn't that great. Like that was kind of the one concerning thing, I think, when you look at this team, and I think why they were so disjointed early on is that I think everyone expected that to be a line that was just going to click. Like those group, that duo especially, and it hasn't worked out. And it does feel like he's starting to settle in with Marchand, and who knows, maybe they go back to it later on if the more Lindholm feels comfortable. Like I feel like if you're playing at your highest level, you need that Pastrnak Lindholm line to eventually click at some point. And it feels like it. I just look at how good Pastrnak is with guys that has to happen at some point, and maybe you revisit it, because I feel like that is where you raise your ceiling offensively. But I mean, hell, who the hell knows? It could be Patra in a few months or something like that as a guy that puts himself in that spot. But I think just individually with Lindholm, he's kind of tough to grade, right? Because I do like a lot of the little things he does, and he can make an impact there. But when you're making almost $8 million, you got to start producing a little bit more. And to his credit, I think he is settling more into that role, which is good to see. Because I think you just look at this whole offense, like I think it's clear this team is not going to be scoring early and often. They're a pretty flawed roster. But that being said, like back in November when they couldn't score at all, or not even putting a shot on goal against the Senators in the third period of game, you looked across that roster, you're like, this team is top heavy, it's disjointed, what have you. It's not a complete product. They shouldn't be this bad. Like there's still so many guys that we saw even last year where like you look all across the depth chart and you're like, is there just some absurd, team-wide regression going on in terms of their offense? Like same with like Zacha. He's not a guy that you can, pencil in for a consistent scoring, but he's starting to play a little bit better. I think it's the same way with guys like Lindholm. You have guys that maybe aren't going to be point per game guys, obviously, but they are starting to pull their weight a little bit more. Like I don't really like Morgan Geekie in a top line role. I think that's an indictment on your roster building, but He's got
Yeah.
four goals, 6 points in his last 6 games. So it is at least encouraging. You're seeing some other guys start pulling their weight a little bit more, because it should not have been as bad as it was for the first 6-7+ weeks of the season.
No, definitely. And you're seeing guys reverting to form and water seeking its level with a lot of players where they're getting where they should have been and where they have to be, frankly. And I think you're right about all that. I do have some thoughts on, the top 2 lines and sort of the way they're made up. I will get to that in a sec. But first, we're going to talk about Prize Picks right now. We're going to take a break in the podcast action and let you know that Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun, and it's super simple. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this hockey season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinion into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Join now, because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. That's right, I said Picksmas. It is the holiday and the gift that keeps on giving. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the hockey board and selecting Garnett Hathaway with over 3 hits, Brock Faber for more than 25.25 minutes of time on ice, Patra came for less than 0.5 points against the Flyers. Very down on Patrick Kane right now. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Prize Picks now offers MasterCard as well for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Let's get back into this. My thought quickly on this before we move on to the next topic. I wonder, I educated opinion, whatever you want to call it. I think Pastrnak wants to play with Pavel Zacha. I'm not sure he wants to play with Elias Lindholm as the center. And I think that's part of what maybe was going on early in the season. Maybe that's part of like the difficult chemistry thing. Maybe that's part of, Lindholm sort of tiptoeing through the early parts of this season. I think Pastrnak wants what Pastrnak wants. I think he's that kind of player. And I think he really wants to play with his buddy Pavel Zacha, and he wants him to be the center. And maybe that was an issue with Montgomery at the beginning of the year. Maybe Montgomery didn't want that, wanted to make Lindholm work with Pastrnak and saw that as something they wanted to try and thought was going to work. But I just think when you see the chemistry that Zacha and Pastrnak have, when you see Pastrnak setting up Zacha, when you see the way they work together, maybe it's best to just leave them as they are and look at Lindholm as a Bergeron-esque player that plays a Bergeron-type game that actually will work well with Marchand because he's used to playing with that kind of player. And it's sort of on them to figure out the chemistry, and maybe that's the right place for him, just given the way he plays, the characteristics he has, and sort of where they're at. Now, you mentioned Patra. I think that's a great person to enter into this discussion because he's lighting it up in Providence. He's regaining his confidence. He's playing really well. He's developing. Like, everybody was like pissed that he went to the Bruins, and how could you do that? He's showing, and they're showing exactly why you do that, and why it worked for Lowry last year, going down for a few weeks at a time to really get his minutes, get his reps, play in all situations, get his confidence up. We're seeing the same thing with Patra, where I think he's getting back to who he is as a player, and maybe has a little more of that swagger now again that he needs to have to make plays to be an offensive player, because he's getting results down in Providence, because he's playing a big role down there. And like, let's face it, he has the skill set, he has the offensive ability, he has the vision, he has all that stuff to play with a guy like Pastrnak, to play with a high-end offensive player. And certainly a Bruins team that needs high-end offensive performers and guys that can create and do things in the offensive zone and have that a little something extra offensively. Patra has that. Now, it's going to be interesting to see does he come up as a wing? Will he play center? Would you try Patra in the middle with Zacha and Pastrnak on the wings? Is that something you would do? Like, there's a lot of interesting possibilities there. But I just wonder, looking at the overall situation, if it was never going to work between Lindholm and Pastrnak because Pastrnak wants Zacha there, and he has a center that he wants to play with, and if that's a dynamic that's going on with this team, because we all know, Connor, these aren't robots, right? These are human beings, and these are superstars with big contracts, and these are guys that want the things that they want. And I think Pastrnak has a little bit of David Krejci in him, where he has the things that he wants to do in his certain way, and the things that he thinks give him success, and he has strong opinions about it. And sometimes he's going to want to make it happen the way he wants it to happen.
Yeah, David Pastrnak hates Jimmy Vesey like David Krejci did. He's like, who is it?
What has Jimmy Vesey ever done?
Who the hell is this guy? No, I agree.
Who is this Karim Garcia? Who the hell is Karim Garcia?
Exactly. No, I mean, I agree in terms of, you look at that Zacha goal on the Seattle game, right, where Pastrnak threads that backhand pass through, I think it was Elias Pettersson's legs, hit Zacha in stride. And I think that is something where, regardless of where you put Zacha, I think you got to keep him and Pastrnak together because you just do have that chemistry. It is fascinating when you talk about when Patra inevitably does come up here. And I as you said, it's encouraging that, and this is what we talked about even before camp started, where if you brought up the notion of maybe they start Patra in Providence, people are like, no, you can't do that. And it's like, oh, well, he's down there now. He's feeling good about his game. He's playing 18, 19 minutes a night on the power play. Yep. Feeling really confident, which is, I think, one thing that has hurt this whole team this year is confidence of being able to make those plays, especially in the offensive zone. And I think Patra's feeling it right now. So that is going to be really fascinating as to where exactly he would go once he comes back, because you could make the case he's a third line center, but I wouldn't hate it, especially early on, of just putting him in a top six role and just see what you have first. I feel like the most likely thing, and it's not what the Bruins do. The Bruins' MO is we'll start you down low and then you work your way up. But it would be fun to see what he could do with with Pastrnak and Zacha for a game, to see what that capability is. Because the playmaking, the poise, he should be a guy that when you have guys that can finish like Pastrnak and Zacha, when you get him and he's on the wing and he's taking that shot first mentality, there's a lot to like about what he could do in that role if you have a guy that's setting him up. So I think that would be really interesting. But, we'll see. Even Charlie Coyle, who I think is, playing his best down the middle, he was bumped to the wing on Tuesday against Calgary. He was with Marchand and Lindholm. And as you said, maybe that is I still don't really like Coyle on the wing that much, but maybe that is your shutdown line, right? Where it's you're taking care of the other team's top line. And if all of a sudden that's your second line, defense first kind of grouping, and then your first line is a Patra, Zacha, Pastrnak line. Again, that's hoping that Patra continues his play up in the NHL like he's been doing down in Providence. But I think there's some intrigue there in terms of if your team's so starved for playmaking, that does have a lot of appeal if that's the way they kind of approach things. But good call for the Bruins in terms of putting Patra down in Providence, because he does look like, at least against that competition, completely different of where he was, for the first couple of weeks here.
Yeah, I think he's where he should be right now. I think it's best for his development to play the minutes. And we're going to get to Oliver Wahlstrom, and I think he's the perfect example of a player that you can get in that no man's land of a talented player that doesn't, isn't in the AHL, is in the NHL, is playing 10 minutes a night, 11 minutes a night, and not really playing in a top six role, and doesn't really develop and just stagnates because, he's not in a league where he can develop in the AHL and really up that confidence, hone his abilities, play in all situations, do the things you need to do as a young player. Instead, he was in his early 20s with the Islanders, in and out of the lineup, not always playing big minutes. And I think, that's part of why we see no numbers out of him the last couple of years. And then we see him get waived as a former first round pick. And you don't want to see that. I think that's a cautionary tale for Patra and for a lot of other guys about what not to do and how not to develop a young player, and how to sort of, turn an asset into something you're just going to lose for nothing on the waiver wire. But I also think Patra, if they decided they wanted to use Coyle on the wing and that's that kind of thing, maybe Patra's your third line center that comes in and is the third line center as well and covers you if you want Coyle to play on the wing in a different role and sort of elevate him. And it just gives them a lot of different options and things they can look at to try to figure out what's going to work and what combinations will work. All right, Wahlstrom picked up on waivers. think it was a no-brainer for the Bruins. A Maine kid, a kid that was a star in the mini one-on-one when he was 10 years old. Somebody that played at BC. Like, he checked so many boxes of what the Bruins are interested in his players, and he still has offensive upside. Like, he has not put it together, as I mentioned, partially I think because he's been sort of stuck in the NHL, but not in a defined role, not able to carve out a role for himself, and sort of in no man's land. He was definitely that way the last couple of years, where he's in and out of the lineup playing 10 minutes a night, and there's not really a lot you can do there if you're a skill guy like him. So he only had a couple of goals last year and a couple of goals this year. I think the most points he's ever had is like 12 goals and 20-something points in the NHL, and that was like 4 or 5 years ago. Your thoughts on Wahlstrom? I think this is a no-brainer to at least try. It's no cost, no risk. And maybe if you put him in a good spot with good players, you'll start to see something offensively, and maybe you find something. Like, you're not a first-round pick, 11th overall for no reason. Like, there's clearly talent there that people have seen. He's got a great shot. He's got some offensive skill, quite a bit. And maybe he can help the Bruins in that regard. It certainly makes sense to look at it, at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, what has been the biggest issue with this team offensively is just having guys that can, finish plays, right? And you look at his shot, there's a reason why, as you said, why he was such a coveted, nearly, the 11th overall pick is that shot and that offensive creativity that he has. So, yeah, like, is he going to be the perfect 200-foot player? No, but I think if you put him in the right spot, whether that's on a power play unit, down on the third line as a guy that can maybe, that's been the one thing with that third line this year. It's just there's, some guys that can possess the puck. You have no finishers really on that group. If he's a guy that can put a few pucks on net, and I think he kind of falls in line with the approach the Bruins need to have in the offensive zone, which is put pucks on net. If you have a guy with that kind of shot, it's not going to beat the goalie clean every time, but if he has a puck that can get through, create rebounds, tips, you're increasing your chances, right? I feel like I'm like Joe Mazzulla doing all of his math of how they want to approaching, but more pucks you have that can get through, create some chaos, and you have guys that are crashing that down low, it should help you at least get your offense going in the bottom six. So, yeah, I think you look at what Wahlstrom can bring to this team, not just the change of scenery, all those things, but what he does do well is something that the Bruins are clearly missing, with that group. So in terms of the risk, or if you even want to call it that, like, I don't think it's even that. It's something that if he works out, he works out. But what he brings in terms of his skill set or his bread and butter is something that this team desperately needed further down the lineup. Does that mean he's going to be a diamond in the rough? He's going to all of a sudden have to be a 20-goal guy? No, I don't think so. But he's definitely a guy worth taking a look at and seeing what he can do to help this team. Because maybe it is just, I don't know if the Islanders are like the Sabres where you leave Buffalo and you just become a good player, but
all of a sudden you're out of jail.
Yeah, exactly. But you do look at that skill set, even if he is, not a complete player, that skill set is too tough to pass up in terms of seeing what he could do in a new spot on a new team, especially one that has really, really struggled to find the back of the net this year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching him play for sure and seeing what he can do with the Bruins. Number 71 in your Bruins program now, Oliver Wahlstrom. All right, let's take a break from the Pucks with Haggs podcast again to talk about our friends at Prize Picks. And, who doesn't like, Connor, a stocking stuffer of some tickets to a Bruins game in your Christmas stocking? Concert tickets under the tree, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, the event type gifts where you can go and have a nice core memory at a concert or a sports game and having an experience with your friends or family. I think those are the best kind of gifts. And Game Time can give you those kind of gifts. Game Time is where you go to get tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying any kind of tickets with Game Time for obviously your Bruins tickets, but also if you're looking for tickets for the Patriots, Celtics, or even comedy or concert tickets as well. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. The game of the week for this week that would make an outstanding Christmas stocking stuffer is the December 28th showdown between the Bruins and the Sabres at the Garden right after Christmas. What would be better than getting Bruins Sabres tickets in your stocking and know you're going to the Bruins game 3 days later? The super deal is $229 for seventh row loge seats. Great deal. which is great value for Bruins tickets. Priority Game Time Picks means curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. All-in pricing, you toggle this feature. It shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. What is better than that? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it, Connor?
Game time.
It's game time. That's right. Game time. Christmas, stocking stuffers. Get on that right now. If you want to send me a gift, get me any kind of concert tickets. I will appreciate that. Please send that to the Pucks with Haggs P.O. Box. Game time. Go get it done. All right. One last question, or we got two more things to handle real quick here, Connor. How much of what we've seen of the struggle, because I've seen a lot of tweets, a lot of messages on social media, a lot of people hammering Jeremy Swayman that he's been terrible, been not as good as he was last year, that this is going to be an awful albatross contract, blah, 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 blah. And you knew this was coming, right? As soon as he signed that deal, you knew the expectations were coming. You knew they were going to be all over him if he struggled. You knew it was going to, and I'm not sure he knew that and understood what he was getting himself into by holding out and holding out for this kind of a deal. But it's definitely there now. People are pissed and they blame him. How much, though, is on Jeremy Swayman? There were people going nuts last night in that game when they were down 3-1. And two of them were slot shots, horrible coverage in the slot. Any NHL goalie is going to have a hard time stopping those. And those weren't the only ones. There was 4 or 5 slot chances in the first, 25 minutes of that game. And then the other one was a puck that bounced on Lomberg's stick right at the net after he made a really great zone entry with speed. I didn't put any of those goals on him last night. And I think in a lot of these losses, in a lot of these games, even when he's given up a lot of goals, I could probably count on one hand the amount of soft goals, bad goals that he's given up. Where you say that's absolutely on the goalie, that's a soft one. I think a lot of this comes down to the defense not getting it done in front of him. And it's hard to blame Swayman, even though the numbers are bad, for a lot of what we've seen.
Yeah, I think especially that game against Calgary, as you said, I think that's more of just the structure in front of him, some bad breaks or anything like that. And even the Winnipeg game, right? There was a few that were for him that are oh, don't like that, but there's also, an 8-1 loss? There was also quite a few of, man, you're not keeping tabs on the guy in front of the net. How many times did, Mark Scheifele, who can finish just about anywhere, is, within 10 feet of the net, unchecked? That's not going to – doesn't matter if that's Jeremy Swayman, Tim Thomas, Dominic Hasek, whoever. They're not going to stop shots like that if you're giving up those opportunities. So, yeah, it hasn't been the strongest year from Swayman, right? But it also doesn't mean that, I think the structure in front of him has also not been up to speed quite yet. And again, it is very funny. I think we all expected the criticism and I get him not maybe playing up to what you thought last year was or anything like that, but people are already talking about an albatross deal. It's if there's anyone who I feel good about is going to find his game, not to say that this guy is going to be, he's going to post a .930 save percentage the last 40 games of the year, right? We're not saying that, but he's a guy that if he's playing to his level, will keep you in most of these games, and is a guy that I think it was worth investing in. It was a bit of a roller coaster getting that contract done, obviously, but he's a guy that even if this year is a little bit of a step back or anything like that, I'm not viewing what his long-term outlook is. I still think the Bruins, you should be happy that I think you found a franchise goalie, which is something that not a lot of teams have. So it's been a little bit rocky out of the gate, but not placing any, wagers as to where exactly he is at the end of the year. But if there's a guy that I'm confident amongst this group of guys that you could say is underperforming, that I think can find his game down the stretch, it's probably Jeremy Swayman. I'm not too concerned about
and
how
also,
he is.
Yes, and there's a track record of him in the playoffs now. I think that's also he could suck during the year. He could finish with a save percentage under 900 this year, based on the way the defense is playing in front of him, based on him struggling in the first few months of the season, and his save percentage and his goals against are probably never gonna look great this year. They're probably always gonna look below his norms, even at the end of the year, just based on how much of a struggle it was the first few months for him to sort of get into midseason form and recover from holding out during all the training camp. But I also think he's the kind of guy that at this point you believe you could go into a playoff series and he's going to turn it on Bobrovsky style and have like the season that wasn't great, and all of a sudden he's going to be really good in the postseason. And those goalies are dangerous, and that's what you're paying for really in that contract, is that as much as anything else. Certainly you want him to perform during the regular season, but as long as he's making the saves like he did last night to win that game, yes, he gave up 3 goals, but he also made great saves in the second half of that game. To keep it in check to where it was and allow them to be able to come back in the third period. And as long as he's doing that and making the saves that he needs to make to win the game, and he's keeping you in a playoff spot, I think, I'm really not worried about him. And I fully expected him to struggle this year based on the holdout, based on the pressures of being a number 1 goalie, based on the noise around him. I thought this was going to be a tough year for him, and rightfully so. Like, he kind of made his own bet a little bit. So, maybe this is a learning experience for him as well. That, he wasn't at a point where he could go skate at BU and be ready to start an NHL season. And maybe he wasn't quite as veteran as he thought he was, and knew what he needed to do as far as reps and getting ready and all that stuff. And I think there was a little bit of a humble tone to some of the stuff he was saying in the first month and a half of the season that told me that maybe he did learn from that experience. And maybe there were some things that he didn't handle as best he could. And now he's kind of figured a little bit of that out, and that's good. But I'm really not worried about him come playoff time. Same with you. I'm not worried about the contract. I'm not worried about him in the playoffs. I think he's a competitor. I think he's a great goalie, technique-wise and everything-wise, and he's going to be perfectly fine.
Yeah. It's almost like you look at just how also, the variance that comes with goaltending, right? That, yes. I think you sign a contract like that, everyone's like, oh, yes, you're gonna have a 920 save percentage the whole rest of the time here. It's like, I even look at, and it's not comparing the two players, in terms of what the expectations are, but you have like a guy like Shesterkin who has a Vezina. Last year he had like a 912 save percentage. It was kind of up and down in the regular season, but when you get him in the playoffs, he's going to steal you some games, and he was a psycho during that playoff run for them. Like, that's the same thing. Even if every year he's not winning the Vezina, if this year Jeremy Swayman ends with a 910 save percentage, but he's an animal in the playoffs, you'll take that guy, knowing that full well.
Forget about the season.
Yeah, knowing full well that over an 8-year span, like, all right, he has a good playoff run again, and who knows, maybe next year he has a 922 save percentage. Like, if you have a guy that is that technically sound, that competitive, that also just gives you that edge in the playoffs, that's a guy worth investing the amount of money in moving forward. That's why I'm not too worried about what he gives you.
No, 100%. And I also think it's overblown, like, how much he's struggled. I think a lot of it has been the defense in front of him, and they basically played no defense the first 20 games of the season. And of course your goalie's going to have bad numbers when that's going on. And we still see it at times. Like, Joe Sacco had to take a timeout 25 minutes in the game last night to tell his team to start covering the slot again, which is basic 101 like defensive structure. All right, Bruins 3 points out of first place right now in the Atlantic Division, 4-point cushion for a playoff spot. And this is with the ups and downs. This is with the start to the year. Just your overall thought on where the Bruins are right now, what your expectations are for them based on what you've seen to this point.
I mean, they've definitely, I think, benefited, Joe, from the fact that no team has really kind of taken off, right? Where like even the rest of the teams in the Atlantic haven't done anything. It is kind of concerning when you look the teams below them. Like, you have Tampa, who I think has like played, last I checked, I think they've played like 11 games this entire year. I don't know what's going on with Tampa's schedule. They're not playing any games at all, but they've got like, I think 4 or 5 fewer games. But that's a team that seemed like they made the right call of signing Jake Gensel over Stamkos, because Gensel's on pace for like a 48 goal season, 100 something point year. That's a team worth keeping tabs on. And then the Senators with Ullmark have been unreal the last 2 weeks. He's been really he's been elevating a team that had a lot of skill but not a lot of goaltending the last couple of years. So those are two teams worth keeping tabs on. But in terms of where they are, you have to feel good about the fact that no other team has really taken off. Like the Panthers are, I think, viewed as still the class of the Eastern Conference, and they've been up and down. That's not saying that they're vulnerable or anything. I do not want to play that team in the playoffs. That is a scary, scary team. But same with like Toronto. Like, that's a team that is probably more complete than they've been in the past. Now all of a sudden Anthony Stolarz is out for a couple of weeks. Not great for them. So if you're the Bruins, I'm not expecting them to, be gunning for the top spot in the Atlantic, but they are in the mix amongst a group that really haven't separated themselves from the pack. So definitely worth keeping tabs, I think, on Tampa and how they can kind of catch up to you and what Allmark is doing with the Senators. But I do think right now they're firmly in the mix there, and they're a team that, again, if they play the way that they should be, of low event hockey, defending the net front, putting every puck possible on net in terms of trying to get those greasy goals, they should be a tough out, and that means they should be a playoff team. Like, I'm not changing my expectations in terms of whether this team can be playing into April. How far into the springtime is probably the bigger concern, right? But yep. I think you look at, even with some teams that are making a push that, weren't in the playoff picture last year, like Ottawa, there's still either way too many bad teams in the East that the Bruins should be able to pile on points against, and teams that, aren't, way too far ahead of the Bruins in the standings, that they'll be firmly in the mix. It also helps that, like, the Rangers just suck now. Like, you have some teams that are completely imploding, which I thought the Bruins were teetering on the edge of collapse early on this year. Look what's going on with the Rangers, because that team has a lot more skill than the Bruins do, and they are a mess right now.
The Rangers are dysfunctional. It's a dysfunctional organization. Like, it's all the way through. There's so many problems with that organization, the way they treated their captain, what's going on with some of their other players, the contract stuff. Like, there is a lot of unrest, scratching Capo Caco the other day and him popping off about it. Like, there's a lot going on with that team that screams out trouble and bad things. And, they're kind of a disaster. And you're right. But there's, I'm like firmly believe, and I have not changed at all, as bad as the Bruins were, they're basically never out of a playoff spot in all those struggles. They are a playoff team. They made sure they were strong right before U.S. Thanksgiving, so they were in the playoff structure in the Atlantic Division there. They're still in it now, even though they're getting smoked, the first two games of the road swing. Like, they're in a spot, I think, where they're going to be a playoff team, and I think you're absolutely right. The question is what they're going to do once they get to the playoffs. But I feel really confident about, saying they're a postseason team, and they're a quality team. They're a good enough team to make the playoffs. Like, yes, Ottawa is playing better, and Allmark seems to be the answer there. No question about it. Like, he's been brilliant for them in net. But, like, are they going to have to ride him, and he's going to get hurt because he's playing a lot of games? Because we've seen he's a very injury-prone guy. I could see something like that happening with them, and if he's out, they're in big trouble. Tampa's definitely a force. And you're right, they've played a lot less games than the Bruins, so they could be in danger of hopping over them. And like, Pittsburgh seems to have figured some things out, and now they're climbing up in the Eastern Conference as well. So, some things are happening. But, like, there's still, like, the Buffalo Sabres, who friggin' lost 6-1 to the Montreal Canadiens. Like, how does that happen? There is, like...
Don't worry, Terry Pagula, though, gave them he went to meet them in Montreal and was like, you guys are doing a good job. It's on you guys. And they lose 6-1 to Montreal. Really? It's like... that didn't work out that well.
Yeah. What happens when that happens? Is that, like, what do you do at that point? Just TNT the entire team, like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote style?
Yeah, exactly.
The Atlantic Division, I think, is still a little bit of the Atlantic Division where there's the haves and the have-nots, and the Bruins are clearly still one of the haves. So I like their chances as far as getting into the playoffs. It just it's a matter of, like, what's going to happen when they face a good team like some of the good teams that have spanked them during the regular season. But we will figure that on later on down the road. Connor, thank you very much for joining us. Let's also thank our sponsors real quick. Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. If you need tickets, download the Game Time app, go to our friends at Game Time, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Connor, one more time, what time is it?
Game time.
Game time. All right. Thank you, Conor Ryan, for joining us, my friend.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you at the rink.